D No Shokutaku 2は、M2 のですね、リアルタイムポリゴンの機能をかなり強く使っているので、1よりもかなりアクション性とかですね、が強くなったタイトルだと思います。かなりスピーディーに
Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Episode. Here we're going to have a brand new retrospective starting today for the month of October that I am calling Warp, a Story in 3 Acts. We're going to be going over the work of Warp, and more specifically the auteur Kenji Eno and his games D, Enemy 0, and D2 on the Dreamcast. And of course, if we're going to be doing a trilogy, where better to start than with the original D on 3DO. Do beware though, I'm playing D's Diner Director's Cut, a more fully featured story-wise version of the game released exclusively in Japan for 3DO. And when I say I've always thought and continue to think that Kenji Eno and Warp were some of the most influential developers of the 90s, and a lot of what they did carries over into modern game design story-wise, I absolutely mean it. Yes, D, as far as a gameplay design is concerned, is antiquated, and it is not aged as well as other games from the era, but if you played this game in the 90s when it released, you would have been absolutely blown away by it. It still remains one of the better selling games on the 3DO, PlayStation 1, and Sega Saturn. This was what really took Warp and Kenji Eno to stardom. They had made a lot of smaller games before D, but this was the game that was their true breakthrough, and Eno's concept of storytelling was finally available to the masses. Now this is basically a full motion video point and click adventure game in a horror genre. All of the designs you're seeing here, all of the FMVs were developed on an Amiga 4000 computer, and then they were used to develop a 3DO game. And because the 3DO company was recruiting developers, some of which hadn't seen as much success as others to get more games onto the 3DO, Kenji Eno and Warp jumped at the chance to develop for this console. The game that you finally got was D. This to me is a very special game. It is a very simple game that you need to beat within under 2 hours to actually see the ending. You sit down and you take it as one whole experience. There are no save points whatsoever, and you ingest and appreciate the entire storyline of the game. And for when this released, there was really nothing quite like it on the market as far as the overall story and adult mature themes contained within. And it's very interesting how those all got there. I'll tell the story about how Kenji Eno swapped the disc out at the last moment later in the video. But this was a revolutionary game, and it really showed that Kenji Eno had a great mind for story development. 99% of the story you're going to be getting within the world of D is going to be all visually communicated through cutscenes and just story beats within the visuals in and of themselves. There's going to be almost no text in this game whatsoever, and just a few small moments of voiced over dialogue. Everything else is going to be inferred by the visual design and other elements you see within the visuals of the game in and of themselves. So as far as visual storytelling is concerned, I think this may be one of the best games of this era to be able to effectively communicate to the player exactly what's going on without the use of written or spoken language. And of course it is a horror game, so there's going to be a lot of fun jump scares as well. It kind of almost feels like a haunted mansion ride that you were interacting with and not just going on. And the actress you see in this game, Laura, and I am calling her an actress because that's what Kenji Eno had decided, was a whole cloth digital actress taken from Kenji Eno's imagination, and the plan was that all of Warp's games moving forward would feature this digital actress Laura playing different roles, and that's how you end up with in Enemy 0, the same character Laura with a different last name and a completely different personality, and in D2 on the Dreamcast, again, a completely different version of Laura. But interestingly enough, which we'll talk about later on in this retrospective, the original Laura was supposed to appear in the 3DO M2 version of D2, but you're going to have to wait a few weeks to find out about that. But as we navigate the world of this gothic castle that the universe of D takes place in, it is so well designed. I love the framing and the camera work. You can clearly tell that Kenji Eno is trying to bring a filmic quality to the camera movements and overall compositions and frames that you see within D. And I would say that as far as the actual filmmaking quote-unquote is concerned, this is highly effective. It conveys the story and the feelings that you should be feeling at that moment in time, giving you just enough to understand what's going on, but not lingering for too long. And all of the camera motions between the FMV cutscenes and the actual interactable part of the game are so incredibly seamless. I will say that this game, I think, did it better than Myst, Riven, or other games of its era, but you can leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think. But what I've always loved about Kenji Eno's games, especially when you get to the Laura trilogy, is just how absolutely incredibly vivid and vibrant the design language is within the games themselves. That blood red wallpaper with that repeating pattern, these lush velvet chairs, this fireplace with this gothic stone architecture, all deliver such world building. You don't really need to know what's happening in the world of D verbally or in the written language to understand where you are and what is happening within the gameplay and story. And that is just down to how well thought out the universe of this game is. And that would definitely continue on to Enemy Zero, and in my opinion slightly lesser so in D2 being an open world game. But for such a small 2-hour experience, D delivers so much impactful visual fun that it does remain one of my favorite games of all time. And even though the puzzles are pretty rudimentary and you'll understand the solution for the most part very quickly, this is here for the experience, for the emotion of it, for listening to the odd music, taking in the environment, and just unraveling the story of what happens in D. And just so you're aware, even though this is a retrospective, I'm not spoiling this game. We're only going to be going through the first third because if you've never played it before, my hope is through this retrospective you play at least one of the games that's within this universe. But I am going to let you watch a cutscene with the visuals and the audio because one, it gives you a little bit of the story, and two, you can hear the absolutely amazing compositions of Kenji Eno, who was not just an accomplished game developer, but a musician as well. So go ahead and watch, and I'll be back with a lot more D. Amazing visuals and a haunting soundtrack, and if you couldn't tell, the audio lifts and lowers so incredibly quickly there. It is a literal vertical line on my waveform. That's something you really don't see in any musical compositions for games. It is dissonant, it's abrupt, and it basically jars the player that's listening to this. And that is exactly what Kenji Eno was most likely intending with his musical background when he did a lot of the audio design of this game. It is jarring, it will get you on your heels, it will make you off balance, and that is what the game really is genuinely trying to do. Now, we did get a piece of paper, and there is an entire puzzle element to this game, of course. Some of it is trial and error, other parts of it you're kind of going to understand. The game does a good job of telegraphing what it is you should be doing. But again, if we just take the visuals, we take the audio language, we take all of the cutscenes, you can understand that the man and team behind making this game were absolutely artists and musicians first and game developers second. And Kenji Eno basically went into game development even though it didn't really seem to be the perfect avenue for him. And we are always glad he did because we get some incredible experiences in D, Enemy Zero, and D2. This entire trilogy is probably his masterwork as far as games are concerned, but he has so many different albums and even books out there. The man was a multifaceted artist that could basically create in any medium, and you can 100% see that within the world of his games. And that is why these games do feel so incredibly special to me. There's an artistic quality about them that you really didn't get that much of back in the 3DO, PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64 era. This was still a time and place on consoles where video games are video games, and the higher arts mediums of writing, of filmmaking, those fine arts didn't really seem to come in as much. Obviously that's something that is very endemic to games these days, and it's somewhere the entire industry ended up going, and I genuinely feel that Kenji Eno was one of the first developers to try to make a games as art experience and not just to make a video game to be pure fun. Because is D actually a fun game? It's an intriguing game, It has some great puzzles, it has a lot of elements that you will enjoy, but as far as a video game fun factor is concerned, it is a very simple experience that intrigues you more than it does entertains you in the traditional video game fun sense of the word. And I think that was a very smart and intelligent design decision, because this game was never going to be a quote-unquote proper video game as far as what you were used to playing when it came out. This is not a Gex, it's not a Super Mario World, it's not a Sonic the Hedgehog, and it's never trying to be any of those things. It's trying to be something new, something unique, something more cinematic, and something that takes a little bit deeper of a delve into what video games can be, both gameplay-wise and narratively, in that era. And that was something that was just so hyper impressive for the time, and I can't stress enough again just how far the video game industry has gone down that road. So many new games are so story and cutscene heavy, maybe too much so in some aspects, but it all kind of starts around this era, and I really do think that Kenji Eno and Warp drove that innovation, especially in Japan, because when this game came out, it did sell extremely well, over 1 million copies on Sega Saturn alone, if you believe the internet. And for a small game development company working on consoles like the 3DO with 2-hour interactive FMV games, that is an absolutely obscene amount of games to actually sell for any one console. And you'll see here we have the number 78 above the door and a keyhole, but we need to figure out exactly where we are able to obtain that key. There's a lot of fun in this game on the puzzles. You need to understand where to go, what to do, and how to progress, and a lot of those puzzles can be challenging, so much so that Kenji Eno clearly loved puzzles as a concept. I will get to it in just a moment of how even the game case contains its own puzzle that you need to solve to be able to actually access some of the contents on the disc in and of themselves. But I love this design here. A prisoner's been shackled, one arm to the wall and another arm completely blocked up via this wall on the side. It makes no sense as to why this would have been done, except for the fact that whoever designed the castle in D must have also been the lead architect for the Spencer Mansion in Resident Evil. Sometimes puzzles don't have a logical explanation to them, and we just accept that as players of games. Because you need to access a key for that door with the 78 above it, there needs to be some sort of puzzle to accomplish and beat before you're actually able to get that key. So there is some gamification of what would be otherwise an interesting concept here, but that makes perfect sense because you do need to solve the puzzles. Now, speaking of puzzles, both the original version of D on 3DO as well as D's Diner Director's Cut contain puzzles within the case. There's one menu option for some bonus features in D that is never accessible unless you enter the right code, and for the longest time no one had ever figured this out. They just kind of hex edited things, but we found the code in the back of the case that said the end, and Laura ended up being left A, up, right A. Enter that code and that scene finally became accessible. So even decades after this game came out, Kenji Eno and Warp had left us one last puzzle to solve in the world of D, and it was really fun like 5 years ago being able to finally figure that out with a few members of my Discord and being able to access the correct way, the last option on the D's Diner Director's disc, without having to cheat or hex edit. You'll see here now we got the 78 into that puzzle and have a ring which ends up being a key. And I will say, if there's one thing about D that I would say is not perfect, trying to actually get that 78 dialed into that switch can be very frustrating because it's more of a timing puzzle and less of a logic puzzle. But that's probably the only area in this game in which I would say I would improve anything whatsoever. And this remains to me one of those special games, the games that were so influential to me when I played them, and the games that I'm definitely going to revisit every single year. And I have been thinking about doing a retrospective on the D trilogy with Enemy Zero for a couple years now, but it finally felt like the right time just because I had a little bit new research on the 3DO M2 version of D2 to share, and it was kind of just something that I felt like talking about as a topic. But I love how committed they are to the entire FMV sequencing here, and how they do borrow some thematic content from other movies, because as Laura's walking down the stairs here, suddenly you're going to see something that looks very familiar from the world of Indiana Jones. but I love how long this cutscene truly is. In a lot of examples, this game is also a technological showcase of what could be done in full motion video, and sometimes they really do let scenes run long, which I am showing you here in its entirety. She is being chased by a boulder down a set of stairs, and it just goes on and on and on, almost in a tongue-in-cheek manner. I'm not sure how many floors Laura is going down, but it seems like she almost runs for eternity before she's actually able to avoid that boulder. It's a good thing she doesn't have a single misstep, where the game in and of itself would end right here and it would be absolutely over. But you can tell that Kenji Eno and the other developers at Warp were enamored with the Amiga 4000 and developing these video sequences in full 3D, and they really do let these sequences run long, pun very much intended, for Laura's descent into the catacombs of this castle. And it's kind of fun that that boulder actually blocks her reverse progress. Once you get through a certain section in this game, you are not going back, and there are optional collectibles within each area. If you miss them, you're not going to get the true ending of the game. So it's one of those things, you have to be eagle-eyed and attentive to what's around you and collecting everything, while also adhering to the 2-hour time limit of the game. Because if you go over 2 hours, the game ends and you need to start from the beginning again. Absolutely cannot save in this game in any way, shape, or form unless you use an emulator and try to use some save states. But I definitely recommend playing this game as it was intended to be played. Sit down, spend 2 hours. I can guarantee you'll be able to figure out how to beat the game before those 2 hours are up, and just take it as kind of a cinematic experience. It's no surprise that the game has a 2-hour time limit and takes about an hour and a half to beat. It's the average runtime for a Hollywood film, and what else would a digital actress like Laura be doing than digitally acting in a film that you can interact with? But I'm going to give you one more sound sample because I do love the dissonant tones of D. I'll be back to tell you a little bit more about this game and why, if you've never played it, you absolutely should. But enjoy. To even call that a soundtrack would really be using the word soundtrack in the wrong definition. It's more of a soundscape, this dissonant tone, this humming, kind of droning in the background that puts you on edge. The audio in this game is not here to be your friend, it's not here to make you happy, it's to drive home the point that what Laura is undergoing in this game is stressful, chaotic, and confusing, and the audio 100% matches that. But this game does have traditional soundtrack elements, and in about 3 minutes I will give you a sample of one of the tracks, because right now I've just been letting you listen to more of these dissonant tones. And you'll see there we solved a puzzle that the game gives you the solution to. A lot of times it's not actually trying to figure out how to solve the puzzle, it's trying to figure out where the information is that tells you how to solve it. Some games in this era would basically give you logic puzzles and not much of a hint on how to do, but here in D, for the most part, you're going to find the answer somewhere in the area you are by researching and checking everything out, which is a different way to do things. And because the game does have that strict 2-hour time limit, was a very intelligent design choice, because if you're trying to solve a puzzle with a clock running and the game gave you no help, you'd basically almost be guaranteed never to beat this. And I love in this area right here, Laura opens a door just to a pit of dead corpses. You really have to start asking yourself in this game, why is there so much death around you? Because again, I am not really giving you the story here. For a retrospective, I had to make a hard decision whether or not I was going to tell you the entire story of D or talk more about the art, aesthetic, and influential nature of this game. And I decided if you played it before, you'll know the story and appreciate this. And if you haven't, hopefully I will intrigue you enough to want to go ahead and play this game after you've watched this video. But here comes the next sound sample with some actual soundtrack elements, because Kenji Eno was a musician and he was an outstanding one at that. I love how the storyline beats get punctuated by actual music, and when things that aren't as important are happening on screen, you go back to that dissonant tone, that droning in the background. And as well, I hear something here, this is one of the main storyline elements of the first third of the game. If you played it before, you'll know what's happening, and if you've never played it before, I hope it makes you want to actually play the game. Because again, this is why I decided to do this retrospective. D, in my opinion, is one of the most influential games ever made of its era, and so much of what we play today in modern games, the deep storylines, that immersion, the sense of storytelling being almost more important than the gameplay in and of itself, really, in my opinion, got started with Kenji Eno Warp and D, and it would definitely move on into both Enemy Zero and to a lesser extent D2. This is just a game that the first time I played it absolutely stuck with me, and I've enjoyed it ever since. I would put this up here, not gameplay wise, but gets its hooks into you wise for me personally, with something like Grim Fandango, as far as the I'll never forget the first time I played it and how much I loved it elements. It has that sense of I've never seen this before and I want to see a lot more of it, and Kenji Eno really leaned into that madman genius aesthetic when he was making his games. Whatever he said went, he wanted to do what he wanted to do, and that was what was so charming about him as a game developer, as a musician, and as an artist. He took the concept in his head and he decided however it would work, he would get it on screen and in front of audiences to appreciate and enjoy, and that is something that is always a struggle in the world of art. I've been a working artist for the last 20 years and there's so many different ideas that float around my head that I'd love to see on screen, but for one reason or another I've never been able to fully realize. Kenji Eno saw, concepted, and imagined things, and he said the hell with it. I'm going to bring it to you. I want to use the world of video games as a medium to be able to do it. And we're all that much luckier for being able to experience the mind of Kenji Eno in the original D. This is just a game that set the tone, in my opinion, for the next 25 years of gaming in some way, shape, or form, and his next two games will definitely drive that forward. And that is why I chose to do this retrospective. There are very few pure auteurs in the world of video games today, and back in the 90s they were even less, but Kenji Eno kicked off the entire concept of being an auteur and a game director at the same time, and D kicks off one of the best franchises of video games in my opinion. I know it's definitely not going to be opinion shared by everybody, but I felt the need to say it, and we'll have the next episode in this retrospective on Enemy Zero next week. Short of that, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.